On a cold, gray morning in Moscow, when the city was still covered in a thick blanket of snow. Everything seemed to be in a deep winter sleep. Under the pale light of the early morning, an old, battered taxi waited near Vnukovo International Airport for its next passenger. The driver, a stocky middle-aged Russian man, leaned against the wheel, chain-smoking and muttering under his breath about the growing number of foreigners in his country. "Foreigners, foreigners, there's no room left for us," he mumbled under his breath. Suddenly, his phone pinged, a new ride request, a familiar destination, the Kremlin. He shook his head, muttering to himself, "Of course, always the rich ones." He accepted the ride, his mind full of thoughts about the powerful and wealthy guests he was about to drive. Minutes later, a tall black man, dressed in a dark winter coat, simple trousers, and worn leather gloves, approached the car. No briefcase, no security, just a quiet, calm presence. The driver squinted at the man, his lips curling slightly in skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right car?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. "The Kremlin, you?" The man nodded politely. "Yes, I have a meeting." The driver looked him up and down with a mocking smile, unaware that he was carrying a person of great power, a man who, in just a few minutes, would teach him a lesson he would never forget. The driver had no idea who the man sitting behind him was. With his simple appearance and lack of any outward signs of importance, Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, appeared humble, with no trace of arrogance. In the eyes of the driver, he was just another ordinary African, nothing remarkable beyond his long coat and unusual calm. The driver continued to drive, his mind still tainted with prejudices about Africans, particularly those coming to a wealthy country like Russia looking for opportunities. As the taxi began to roll down the snow-covered streets of Moscow, the driver couldn't stop himself from making derogatory remarks. "Another African here to find gold in Russia. Huh?" His mocking laughter filled the cold air, and his words of contempt echoed in the car. He went on with more ignorant questions. "The Kremlin doesn't take walk-ins, I guarantee you." But Ibrahim Traoré didn't respond. Everything in the car seemed still. Only the sound of Russian rock music blaring from the radio filled the tense space. He didn't speed up, he didn't do anything, he simply sat in silence, looking out the window as if accepting each moment of this journey. Despite being insulted, Ibrahim remained silent. In that moment, his silence wasn't just a reaction, but a powerful form of resistance. His silence was the most potent weapon, making the driver more and more confused about the man he was driving. Time passed in this quiet space. The only sounds were the driver's taunts and the hum of the car's engine on the snow-covered road. The driver couldn't understand why the man sitting behind him remained so quiet. Not reacting, not speaking a word. The silence only made him feel like he wasn't being respected, which only grew his frustration. "Why aren't you talking? Don't people usually chat when they're in a taxi?" the driver thought to himself, continuing to vent his anger onto the passenger. He sped up, not slowing down when hitting potholes, speeding through the snowy roads, ignoring every danger. His mocking remarks grew bolder, repeating again and again, "Now they're sending their leaders here too. Huh, why is Africa sending people like you to Russia?" Each sentence was a strong jab. But Ibrahim Traoré remained calm, his eyes never leaving the view outside the window. It seemed like Ibrahim's patience had reached the limit of the driver's tolerance. After a while, Ibrahim spoke gently, "Please slow down, it's icy." But the driver snapped back angrily, "You don't tell me how to drive. Do you think this is your country?" he yelled. However, Ibrahim didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just sat there, calm, unshaken, showing a self-control and inner strength that no one could comprehend at that moment. As they neared the Kremlin, the atmosphere became even more tense. Everything seemed to be reaching a climax. But the driver still didn't realize the significant change that was about to occur. He didn't know that the man in the back seat was not just an ordinary passenger but the president of a country. The driver's smugness and arrogance prevented him from recognizing the importance of the man he was dealing with. Even as the car passed through the snow-covered streets, the driver grew more contemptuous and unrestrained. "The Kremlin isn't a place for people like you," the driver said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "People like you come here looking for something we don't have." But Ibrahim Traoré remained silent. He didn't argue, didn't refute, didn't let his pride or anger dictate his actions. The driver thought he had the right to insult him because he couldn't see what was hidden inside this man. As the taxi approached the gates of the Kremlin, the driver suddenly slowed down. Feeling something was wrong, a strange feeling started to creep up in his mind. The security guards, wearing uniforms and earpieces, began to move toward the gates. The car stopped. The driver, confused and unsettled, turned around to look at Ibrahim Traoré with a questioning look. "Wait, are you really going in there?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. Ibrahim's answer was once again silence. But it was this very silence, along with the appearance of the security guards, that served as the first sign for the driver that he had made a grave mistake. The truth about the man in the car was about to be revealed. The taxi stopped near the Kremlin gates. The air around them grew tense as the driver noticed the security guards with earpieces stepping forward from both sides. He didn't understand what was going on, but a strange feeling began to rise in his chest. Everything seemed off, but his arrogance and pride kept him from stopping. Confused, the driver turned to look at the man in the back seat with a questioning gaze. "You didn't tell me who you really are, did you? You're not just an ordinary man." His words were sharp, but there was still no response from Ibrahim Traoré. The black man continued to sit quietly, looking out the window, as if nothing could shake his calm. When the taxi came to a complete stop, the driver, now losing patience, shouted, "You didn't tell me who you really are. You lied to me." Ibrahim simply reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet to pay. But just as the driver's hand reached for his collar, a chilling silence enveloped the scene. The driver didn't expect that in that instant. 3 Kremlin guards would rush in like shadows, opening the door, pulling him out of the seat, and throwing him to the cold pavement. The scene unfolded in a flash, so fast that the driver barely understood what was happening, feeling his hands being held tight and the cold Moscow air biting into his skin. The door swung open, and from outside, the sounds of hurried footsteps and radios crackling filled the air. Everything was spinning, and the driver could only stare at the unshakable stillness of Ibrahim Traoré, the man he had so gravely misjudged. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the taxi, snow gently dusting his coat, he was in no rush. His coat, though simple, radiated a quiet strength and resolve. The security guards helped him walk toward the Kremlin gates, while behind him, the driver lay face down on the icy pavement, his hands cuffed and surrounded by 2 armed men. The insults that had once filled the driver's mouth were now replaced by a deep, paralyzing fear, as he realized he had made an irreversible mistake. Inside the Kremlin, the atmosphere was cold and solemn, but Ibrahim Traoré remained perfectly composed. He uttered not a single complaint, nor made any demands, only exuding a powerful presence and unyielding resolve. A door opened, and inside, waiting for him, was President Vladimir Putin. Through the security feed, Putin had watched the entire incident unfold, from the moment the driver insulted Ibrahim to the moment the truth was revealed. Ibrahim's words in the car were now proven by the swift actions of the Kremlin guards. Putin stood up, his eyes cold as he looked at Ibrahim. "I sincerely apologize for what happened," he said in a deep, respectful tone. "This is not the image of Russia. This was the ignorance of one individual, and Russia will never tolerate such behavior." Ibrahim Traoré simply nodded, offering no further words. He didn't need any justification. Everything was clear. In that moment, his actions, his calm demeanor, and his inner strength had made everything clearer than ever before. That day, when Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the podium to speak, there were no bright stage lights or dozens of cameras pointing at him. There were no lavish microphones or rows of flags waving in the background. He stood in a cold, snowy place, with hundreds of Africans, students, workers, and families waiting to hear from a man they knew well, a leader. Not only because of his title but for the values he represented. Ibrahim Traoré wore no fancy suit, no gold medals, or any symbols of power, just his dark coat, the same coat he had worn when sitting in that taxi, where disrespect had turned into a powerful lesson for the whole world. He stood there, poised, not hurried, not flashy, but undeniably strong. When he spoke, it wasn't a long speech, but rather simple words full of power. Many have asked me why I didn't react immediately. Why I didn't shout or demand justice right then and there. Ibrahim paused, looking into the eyes of his audience and continued, because I don't need to roar to be heard. The lion knows who he is. Even in silence, his words rang out as a powerful affirmation. Dignity is not something that can be easily broken. The world may not always understand the true value of a person. But through Ibrahim Traoré's composure and resolve, a clear message was sent. Respect doesn't just come from words, but from how we stand firm in the face of challenges.